Hello everybody, my name is Catherine Rooney. I'm the Senior Partnerships Officer at one of the UK Government's flagship scholarships, Achieving, and I will be your MC today. I am very excited to be welcoming you to one of our first ever cross scholarships collaboration events. The Hackathon has been designed to coincide with the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of Parties, COP26, which I'm sure most of you, if you're on this call, are aware is happening in Glasgow this November. So one of the stated goals for COP26 is collaboration. And in many ways, this is the core goal. It's the goal that supports all of the other COP26 goals and the fundamental purpose of every COP. It's a recognition that, in the words of COP President Alok Sharma, on climate, the world will succeed or fail as one. It's appropriate then that the HMG Scholarships Climate Hackathon should be a truly collaborative and truly global event. Over 130 alumni from almost 50 countries and territories worldwide have come together for this groundbreaking project, which has been jointly organised between the three FCDO-funded scholarships, CSC, Marshall and Chevening. I think somebody came off mute then, but it looks like they're back on mute, so that's great. Of course, one of the central aims of our scholarships is to facilitate global cooperation and build global networks. And that's why it's so great to see all of our alumni expanding by bringing these three scholarships together in this way. Before we get started, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to the scholarship teams at the ACU who've been working for several months to make this hackathon possible. And I also want to thank our teams for the work they've put into their proposals. There have been a host of advisors who've been working behind the scenes to support the teams, and also to our judges for their expertise today. Thanks so much for all of your hard work. I'm personally very excited to hear today's proposals, and from what we've seen yesterday at the finance and collaboration events, and also from looking at the slides, I think these proposals have the potential to be truly impactful. While only one team will win the chance to present at our roundtable prize event, I hope that the proposals we see here today will have a life beyond the hackathon. Great, so that's the introduction. To move on to the format of the event. As I mentioned, over the last 2 weeks, over 130 alumni from 3 scholarship programs have been working hard to come up with policy solutions to real climate issues. 34 teams had 24 hours over those 2 weeks to collaboratively come up with the proposals that you're going to see today. We've split the policies into 4 themes following the COP26 themes. So there's finance and collaboration, which were yesterday, adaptation today, and then tomorrow, mitigation. Expert advisors have been supporting the teams. Thanks again for their hard work. Today we're going to be hearing from the adaptation teams. The format will be that one presenter from each team will present, and then we'll have they'll present for 5 minutes, and we'll have a chance at the end for the judges to ask questions. I'd like to encourage everybody to engage as fully as possible with the presentations, using the chat box, which you can see at the bottom of the screen, to talk to one another and perhaps even continue the conversations. And I see somebody's popped a message for me. The slides aren't moving at this stage, so that's right, that there's no slide moving just yet. Right, so to introduce our panel of expert judges today, our first judge is Dr. Mark Tebbeth. Dr. Tebbeth is a lecturer of environment and international development in the School of International Development at the University of East Anglia. He's an interdisciplinary social scientist whose research addresses issues related to people and populations, responding to and adapting to risks arising primarily from global environmental change. Within this very, very broad area of research, his particular interests are in human migration, mobility and forced displacement, vulnerability, resilience and adaptation. He's worked in many countries around the world, but currently focuses on the Greater Horn of Africa and India. In addition to his work at UEA, he is a theme leader for the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research and leads the centre's research activities on understanding how to address the twin goals of poverty alleviation and achieving meaningful action on climate change. Active research projects include climate resilient development pathways, in semi-arid regions of Africa and Asia. An IDRC FCDO funded project focusing on ensuring development within semi-arid regions is sustainable and supports adaptation and mitigation goals, and a Royal Society funded project looking at drought resilience in East African dryland regions, which explores how populations manage the impacts of water scarcity, amongst others. So thank you very much to Dr. Mark Tebbeth for joining us. Our second judge is Enrique Lopez Arroyo. Enrique is currently finishing his PhD at the Centre for Urban Sustainability and Resilience at the University College London. He's researching the production of electricity from wastewater using microbial fuel cells. His research is focused on the recovery of energy and resources from the management of waste and the treatment of wastewater. In 2016, Enrique collaborated with the Ecuadorian government in the development of a national bioenergy plan with the aim of preparing the ground and facilitating the implementation of waste-to-energy technologies across the country. In 2010, while working at Queen's University of Belfast on the development of a business model for the implementation of biogas plants in Northern Ireland, Enrique participated in the development of a response document to a public call from the Northern Ireland Assembly on the level of support as renewable obligation certificates for different renewable technologies. Enrique is interested in the implementation of new policies and the use of state-of-the-art technologies to improve the efficiency of the licensing and permitting systems. The adequate management of the environmental permitting process and licensing system at a national level is key to enable the implementation of policies aimed to tackle climate change and the rapid loss of biodiversity. Maybe a little clue for some of our teams there from Enrique's judging perspective. Thank you very much, Enrique, for joining us. Our third and final judge today is Tracy Ann Nicole Hyman. Tracy Ann is a geoscientist who has developed a keen interest in researching climate change vulnerability, adaptation and resilience in small island states. She's been working and researching in the fields of environmental sciences, disaster management and information and communication technologies for several years. She's not only focused on climate change, the problem, but solutions that can be derived to combat it. She's therefore personally wired into finding solutions to the Earth's challenges. As a PhD candidate at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus, she's working on a flood model that can assist disaster planners with reducing the number of lives lost and infrastructural damage from hazards using artificial intelligence. Welcome and thank you, Tracy Ann. So now that I've introduced our teams, now that I've introduced our judges, I will introduce our teams. Just as a reminder, teams will present for 5 minutes, and during that time, another team member will be able to answer audience questions from the chat box, so do post your questions in the chat. We have 14 teams presenting today, representing more than 20 countries. So when each team begins, they'll speak for 4 minutes and I will give a 1 minute warning. Just to let you know to the speakers, please don't be put off. I hope I don't disturb your flow when I give you your 1 minute warnings, but we will be keeping strictly to time. So then at 5 minutes, I'll ask you to end and we'll move on to the judges' questions. Judges have been invited to ask 1 question at the end of each presentation. And if additional judges have questions, they can also pop those in the chat box to be responded to by the team. So now that we've done all of the logistics and the housekeeping, we'll move on to the main event. I am very pleased to present our first team, Team Madagascar. This is a team made up of 5 Chevening alumni from Madagascar. The presenter today will be Valim Bavaka, Rahirim Ananjara, and answering questions in the chat box, we have Juliana Andrianzi Farana. So without further ado, we will hand over to Team Madagascar.
Thank you so much for giving us the floor. Hi, we are Team Madagascar. So let's now go straight to the point. Next slide, please. Not so long ago, we all thought that climate change was something for our grandchildren to solve, but it's no longer something that is abstract for Madagascar, which is currently experiencing the world's first climate change-induced famine, according to the United Nations. A drought that has now lasted 4 years is affecting an estimated 1.35 million people who are currently food insecure, and a wave of acute malnutrition is affecting more than 100,000 children, according to the World Food Programme. This is the 16th episode of famine in Madagascar, but the worst in 40 years, and climate change has surely played a role. With almost 90% of the population working in the agricultural sector, the inability to cultivate crops has left people without food and resources. Unfortunately, the south of Madagascar remains a project graveyard because of the lack of synergy of actions and the discrepancy between the priorities and the cost effectiveness of the solutions proposed by the actors in the sector. So what solutions do we, Team Madagascar, suggest? Next slide, please. Related to the context in the south of Madagascar. Next slide, please. Related to the context in the south of Madagascar, agroecological approach is identified as the most suitable solution to address climate change issue in those areas. Agroecology is a multi-sectoral and a sustainable solution to tackle food security and water scarcity in the south of Madagascar. In terms of agriculture, mixed cropping and intercropping will enhance moisture conservation, soil fertility improvement, and nutritional diversity. And to address water scarcity, irrigation and water conservation have to be considered. Next slide, please. Related to the context in the south of Madagascar, ownership defined by a bottom-up approach is an important aspect to ensure better implementation and sustainability of any policy. Therefore, hearing the community voice in order to identify their needs, discuss with them about the traditional and existing practices, which means the proposed solution will come from the community. Next slide, please. As far as the policy implementation is concerned, several lines of action should be considered. First, regarding funding for adaptation, must be directed towards this long-term and sustainable solution and not be limited to the immediate solution of goods ready for consumption. Although we believe that these different solutions are equally important in the light of this situation. To this end, the government as well as civil society organizations play an important role in drawing the attention of internal community leaders to the critical case of southern Madagascar. There is no one-size-fits-all solution, though, related to agroecological practices, and the most suitable technical approaches should emerge from the local knowledge. It is therefore the duty of the central government to dedicate the necessary resources to set up a community and a substantial budget for the research and development of agroecological approaches. In addition, strong governance at all levels is required, whether at the level of the local community or of central government. And this must be underpinned by a vision for the South around agroecology. The scaling up of this vision then depends mainly on the external and international allies mobilized for this fight. Hence, the need for strong synergy between all stakeholders. Last but not least, capacity building is probably one of the main pillars of implementation. With the support of technical and financial partners, along with the local and national authorities, smallholders and rural families should be supported and trained in the process of defining local practices and ownership acquisition. Monitoring and evaluation systems are to be defined upstream for impact measurement. And in light of all of this, COP26 should be a golden opportunity for the Malagasy government to claim compensation that is clearly owed to the population of southern Madagascar. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for such a wonderful start, Valin Bavaka. That's really opened up a lot of thought areas for us all. I will ask our judges if there is a question for Valin Bavaka. If you just pop your hand up, one judge. We've got an applause. So congratulations to you. I don't see a question from any of our three judges.
Oh, I've got a question.
Oh, please go ahead.
Sorry, I was looking for my hand, but I couldn't find it.
That's right. Just jump in. That's great. Thank you very much. Over to you.
I get my question is, What do you see as the main barriers to implementation? I guess the single biggest barrier to effective implementation of your policy, and how would you seek to overcome that barrier?
So in Madagascar, as it is not the first episode of drought, it is now the 16th episode, but it is the worst. We mean by project graveyard that there has been solutions that have been implemented in the past, but as I said before, there is this lack of synergy between the international actors and also between government actors such as the Ministry of the Environment and the Ministry of Water and even the Ministry of Blue Economy. As we all know as well, Madagascar, as many African countries, is really suffering from corruption and bad governance. So this really impeach some solutions to be applied, and at the same time, this the south of Madagascar, the regions that are most affected by the famine, are located in a I would say landlocked zone where it's almost impossible to intervene because there are many insecurity problems. So that means that to all of this, the government needs to have a specific vision for the South. But with the government, all actors should be all in it together. So we need intervention of the civil society to expand the network needed, but also to encourage all international communities to act, to give the necessary fund to tackle the problem and to realize a long-term solution. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the question there. I see there are a couple of other questions and another hand up. Just in the conscious of timekeeping, if you want to pop your questions in the chat box, and I'm sure Team Madagascar will get to answering them typing. Thank you so much for your first presentation. We'll now move on to our second team. This is Team Isago. This is a team made up of 8 Chevening alumni from Botswana. Our presenter today will be Ketumetse Mosweu, and answering the questions in the chat box will be Wetsho Mosokwe. So without further ado, we'll hand over to Team Isago.
Thank you, Catherine. Greetings, everyone, and I will get straight into it. Can I have the next slide, please? So in Botswana, just like in many other countries of the world, the impacts of climate change has led to increased vulnerabilities, loss of livelihoods, and loss of habitats. The main challenge to adaptation is lack of appropriate climate risk data, which makes planning for adaptation difficult. Adaptation officials do not have a practical outlook of what forms climate risks and vulnerabilities may take. The absence of a policy to address this data gap leaves adaptation planning at the mercy of the imagination of those that are in power, and this runs the risk of perpetuating maladaptation. Next slide, please. So as a solution, what are we proposing? We are saying climate risk management, risk characterization, risk assessment, and the presentation of such data are an integral part to successful adaptation planning. So for Botswana, we are proposing the development of an interactive spatial climate risk data mapping tool at the district level. So what will this tool do? This tool is going to showcase low risk and high risk zones. It is going to allow for the simulation of the number of not only people that are in vulnerable situations, but also vulnerable livelihoods and vulnerable habitats and ecosystem. This tool is not going to rely not only on scientific knowledge, it is going also to draw from the strength of traditional or indigenous knowledge to strengthen the tool even further. Can I have the next slide, please? So how is this tool going to impact communities. This tool is going to allow communities and adaptation officials to visualize climate risk, to visualize the impacts and the vulnerabilities that come from climate risk. And it is going to allow for targeted solutions and interventions instead of generalizations that usually miss the mark. And when interventions are targeted, then it means livelihoods and habitats can be better protected. The tool is going to be also very instrumental in documenting traditional or indigenous knowledge, which can then be passed from generation to generation. This tool is going to increase meaningful participation and engagement of local communities and district officials. Communities are now not going to only be adaptation officials are not only going to be imposing solutions to local communities, but local communities are going to own solutions. They are going to interact with the maps, they are going to add to the maps, and that will lead to a meaningful engagement. This tool also is going to ensure that there is no blanket approach to adaptation, and we are now able to contextualize responses. Adaptation officials will now know which areas are vulnerable and to what extent, and this increases the success of adaptation interventions. The tool is going to improve the availability of data, which is a huge problem, not only in Botswana, but in other developing countries. It is also going to enhance the skills available locally. Can I have the next slide, please? So how are we going to implement this tool? We are proposing for a pilot project within the most vulnerable district. We proposed the Ngamiland district because Ngamiland houses the world's largest Indel Delta, which is the Okavango Delta, which is also home to vast wildlife and human life, and it's also prone to flooding. So we are going to have a collaboration effort between research institutions. Luckily, this area
1 minute remaining.
Institution, we are going to rope in district officials, political leaders, and communities, and they're all going to come together to develop this tool. The process can then be repeated in other districts until a national interactive climate risk map is developed. We are going to also, because we don't want this to be a once-off tool, we are going to propose that development planning policies in district be updated to include this tool. Where are we going to get the finance? Finance can be assessed through the central government, through district savings, district council savings, and money can also be applied from the Adaptation Fund and from the Green Climate Fund. We thank you.
Thanks very much for that. A second time, a very well managed in terms of time. It's fantastic to see you're able to condense all of that information into 5 minutes and keep your time. So thanks very much for that. I will hand over to our judges. Do any of our 3 judges wish to jump in with a question for Team Isago?
Yes, I do. This is Tracy and Hyman. Thank you, Team Isago, for your presentation. A quick question, which climate risks are you planning to simulate with the tool for your pilot project?
Thank you for that question. The climate risks that we are planning to simulate with the tool are floods, wildfires, loss of habitats due to droughts.
So it's going to be an all hazards map, or you're going to start with one first?
Yes, because for a pilot project, when we start, we'll start with, because we've picked one district to start with, so we'll start with flooding in the Ngamiland district.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I think another couple of questions have come into the chat, so I will hand over to you and your teammates to get responding to those. But thanks very much for our second presentation of the day. Right, now we'll move over to our third team. This is Team Adapt to Survive, made up of 3 Chevening alumni from Anguilla. The presenter today will be Carencia Ruse, and answering questions in the chat will be Sharma Fleming. So without further ado, we'll hand over to Team Adapt to Survive.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to jump right in. Can you move to the next slide, please? Anguilla is a small island coastal developing state that is exposed to natural disasters, coastal erosion, and loss of biodiversity. One of our biggest challenges is trying to mitigate these risks while we utilize our natural resources to promote sustainable development. What makes this even more difficult is the fact that we have no funds dedicated to climate change. We've been relying on project funding on a very small scale to help us to achieve our climate change objectives. Despite our efforts, external shocks continue to set us back, including the collapse of 2 of our indigenous banks, the global recession, which has caused a spike in the cost of the imports that we rely on, and COVID-19, where funding that could have been allocated to climate change has been redirected to other priority areas, including health and education. In essence, our climate change vulnerability continues to expand while our capacity to invest in adaptation is declining. Next slide, please. To address this challenge, we propose the establishment of a climate change trust fund for Anguilla to implement adaptation projects. Key sources of financing will include a percentage of payments from foreign investors seeking to buy land in Anguilla or seeking to develop in Anguilla, fees from businesses with high environmental footprints, including petroleum companies and boating companies, a percentage of the environmental taxes charged by tourist accommodations, including resorts, hotels, and villas, and fines associated with environmental degradation activities, including pollution, sand mining, and major forms of deforestation. Philanthropists and other donors that have a special interest in climate change resilience will have the opportunity to contribute to our fund. We have identified this as a very important source of financing, and as such, we will ensure that there are transparency mechanisms in place to prevent contributions from going into the government's consolidated fund. Next slide, please. We anticipate that our climate trust fund for Anguilla will enable us to adapt to existing and future climate change impacts, as well as allow us to set our own climate change priorities. We envision that it will promote a bottom-up approach to climate change decision-making, where vulnerable communities can design projects that meet their own needs while improving their understanding of and commitment to climate change, as well as fostering collaborative climate action. We also seek to invest in climate change technology, which will improve the implementation of early warning systems and the development of risk maps to lead to more innovative and impactful projects. Such participatory actions will bridge the gaps in knowledge at the individual, community, and national level, all of which will move Anguilla towards climate resilience. Next slide, please. Our proposal seeks to adopt a multi-sector approach, which includes public sector, private sector, and community-based groups to ensure that climate change adaptation is recognized as a national priority. Through strategic management of the trust fund, we envision that it will support projects with localized community benefits, as well as projects that have national value that can be replicated on a regional and international scale. The constitution of the trust fund will detail the criteria by which projects will be assessed to ensure that projects are recognized for their real-time on-the-ground benefits. Building awareness about what the trust fund is intended for and how vulnerable communities can benefit will also promote equitable access. Next, sorry, same slide. Given that Anguilla has an established investor network and considering increasing attention around climate change adaptation and resilience, we forecast that we will receive generous and consistent contributions. We also intend to build the trust fund for at least 2 years before we start investing in any project. We will also ensure that—
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. The portion of funding that's allocated to the administration and management of the fund will be capped at a certain percentage so that we don't go overboard. Our team recognizes that it is a tall order to ask our government to divert funds from an already stretched budget to support this trust fund. We also recognize that the sustainability of the fund requires unmatched collaboration between key stakeholders to implement and enforce existing policies and strategies that have been dormant for years. The process we imagine will be frustrating and labor-intensive, but the motivation to see it through is simple. Our lives on this beautiful yet vulnerable island that we call home depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carencia. Yeah, I think that really rings true, your closing words there. I will open up to the judges if there are any questions for Carencia and Team Adapt to Survive. Enrique?
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. Just to know, like, if you see your project being replicated internationally, and how do you see, like, you could adapt it to do so? Thank you.
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question, please?
If you see your project being replicated internationally for outside of your country, and if you do so, how would you adapt it to have an impact outside?
Okay, so when we spoke about adaptation of projects on the international scale, we meant specifically adaptation projects that the fund would support. So for example, if we decided to implement or invest in a project that dealt with managing coastal erosion through the implementation of beach nourishment mechanisms and hard engineering mechanisms, we imagine that the best practices we learned from that particular project can be replicated in other regions and on the international scale. So in essence, the projects that we are referring to would be the ones that the fund would invest in. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And again, I think there's already a couple of questions coming into the chat, so I will leave that to your team to respond to. Thanks very much for that presentation. We will now move on to the fourth team for today. This is the team Caribbean Climate Champions, or 3Cs. It's a team of 6 members, all Chevening alumni representing Antigua and Barbuda and also Barbados. So our presenter today will be Carol Ann Blenman, and answering questions will be Danielle Howell. Over to you.
Greetings. We, the Chevening alumni from Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean, are presenting a proposal in collective support of finance for coastal adaptation within the Caribbean archipelago. This proposal has wide implications for ex-regional SIDS. Next slide, please. Coastal adaptation represents a heightened challenge for SIDS as their adaptive capacity and developmental status are interrelated. Noting the existential threat of climate change, Caribbean SIDS are particularly vulnerable to coastal hazards due to their geographical locations, exposure to hydrometeorological hazards, the existence of fragile ecosystems and environments. As a result, coastal development and infrastructure will face increased impacts. Today, approximately 10% of the world's population live in coastal areas. However, without the implementation of large-scale context-specific adaptation measures, the IPCC predicts that these areas will be rendered unviable by 2021. In its opening remarks at the recently concluded United Nations Conference on Trade and Development in Barbados, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres noted that SIDS currently receive only 2% of adaptation funding. Next slide. Our solution to support Caribbean SIDS via concessionary financing in the form of grants, which would alleviate existing pressures on the public purse to provide social services, especially healthcare, in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. In terms of technical assistance, we seek to partner with institutions in the global south, hence promoting greater South-South cooperation, as well as those within the developing world, thereby promoting North-South cooperation. In terms of capacities, we seek to improve capacities in the realms of human, technical, and institutional manpower and know-how at the national and hence regional levels. In terms of knowledge transfer, we would share best practices in coastal adaptation whilst being cognizant of distinct geological features and land formations within a given country context. We seek to establish a regional coastal risk information and planning platform to mitigate impacts and improve coastal resilience, and ultimately to replicate efforts across remaining OASIS member states. Next slide, please. In terms of the impact, we envision that the proposal will elevate political will at the international level to address the needs of vulnerable and disadvantaged groups, strengthen institutions with a mandate of coastal and marine governance, promote the sustainable use of ecosystems by incorporating their tangible and intangible benefits, hence minimizing intolerable losses and damages to the coastal environment. Also, it supports the restoration of coastal habitats affected by climate impacts, provides stable and predictable environments for lives and livelihoods associated with blue economy activities, mitigates shoreline changes and maritime zones under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, creates a barrier against storm surges and other high-intensity precipitation events via erosion control, and improve public coastal access for all through the fulfillment of Article 9 under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which speaks to access, right? It would involve the application of nature-based solutions from hard and soft methodologies, such as dunes, groins, seawalls, and revetments, and lead to the enhancement of the SIS tourism product. Next slide, please. In terms of implementation, we'll be utilizing the Richard Haynes Boardwalk in Barbados as the pilot study. In terms of its scale, it is regional. We would like to start with Antigua in the first instance, noting that it is the most affected country in terms of its exposure to coastal risks.
1 minute remaining.
And in terms of the affordability, we'll be utilizing a cost and benefit analysis to determine the feasibility, duration, operating and maintenance expenses of the project proposed. The process involves an inclusive and diverse group of stakeholders across donors and regional institutions, as well as academia. And it will require environmental and human rights impact assessments across different communities, particularly the youth. Next slide. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the organizers of the Her Majesty's Government's Climate Change Policy Hackathon and the Chevening alumni from Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean who contributed to the development of the presentation, and to reiterate, the proposal calls for collective support for adaptation at the national, regional, and international levels. And in the context of COVID-19 and other exogenous shocks affecting the region, we have to ask ourselves, if not now, when? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol-Anne. Another great example of time efficiency. So thanks very much for that. Judges, is there a question for Carol-Anne and team 3Cs? Oh, there's a hand up. Whose is it?
It's mine.
Oh, go ahead. Please go ahead. Thanks.
Hi, Carol-Anne. Thanks for your presentation.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. My question to you is, what do you see as the single biggest risk to the effective implementation of your policy? So what do you think is the biggest, if it were to be selected, what do you foresee to be the biggest risk? And how would you look to overcome that?
Okay, thank you for your question. I believe that the single biggest risk would be trying to get stakeholder buy-in, especially at the community level, because they might not understand the implications of the proposed measure in terms of its primary, secondary, and cumulative impacts as relates to securing their lives and livelihoods, right? So in order to get them more involved in the initiative, we would try to promote community campaigns, whether through the local government information services, media platforms, or via a UWE research hub, where we would detail the proposal across various social media and also engage various communities in town hall discussions to get their feedback on the initiative.
Super. Thank you very much.
Right, you're welcome.
Thanks very much, Carol-Anne. I think there may be another question coming in on the chat, so I'll leave that over to you. And we will move on to our next group. So our fifth team today is called Just Involvement of Indigenous People in Decision Making, shortened to JIIPD or JIPID. You can correct me. This is a team made up of 6 members representing both Chevening and Marshall alumni from North, Central and South America, and that includes Brazil, Mexico, Peru, Guatemala, the USA and Paraguay. Our presenter today will be Gabriela Casanave, and answering questions will be Alex J. Carney. So over to you.
Hello, oh, sorry. Can you please put the previous slide? So hello to everyone. I'm Gabriela from Paraguay, and I will be presenting our policy proposal called Tecoja. And it means the place where we are, what we are. And it's in Guarani, an indigenous language spoken in South America. Next, please. Next, please. So we would like to characterize the huge challenge our proposal wants to address by bringing up the voice of an indigenous woman leader from Paraguay. So she says, we are told we are the guardian of nature, but our voices are not taken into account for climate action and environmental justice. So this is very important because it highlights the fact that at international spheres and commitments, we recognize indigenous people and put the huge responsibility for them to be stewards of nature. But at the same time, the national political spheres does not give them the power to actually exercise these roles of guardians of nature. On the contrary, development policies in countries like Peru and Paraguay are characterized by giving more power to mining, hydrocarbon exploration, soy and cattle industries. So indigenous communities have to adapt in a very unjust context to multiple threats, from droughts, flooding, glacier melting, to biodiversity loss, water, air, and soil pollution. All of these put indigenous community in a climate and environmental poverty trap because their livelihoods are highly dependent on nature. Moreover, in Peru, we have 48 indigenous languages. This means that language plus all the previous are barriers for women and youth to involve in prior consultation processes and in decision making. Next, please. So our policy proposal is a platform for just adaptation. What do we mean by just adaptation? A recognition of different causes of vulnerability, of indigenous knowledge, practice, and techniques, of indigenous woman role as stewards of nature. Imagine this, the voices of indigenous people translated into story maps as their source of evidence. We propose then a digital platform that aims to collect, map, and interconnect the knowledge, action, and needs of indigenous communities with the interests and concerns of government actors. In addition, the platform will serve as an observatory that shows through indicators the level of inclusion and participation of indigenous women and youth in decision-making. Next, please. So what is the impact? So we want to create evidence of climate change impacts and the proposed adaptation solutions based on Peruvian indigenous people knowledge, practices, and technology. By this, we are gonna have a huge impact on legitimacy, inclusiveness, transparency, and justice. We will use evidence to increase effectiveness and legitimacy of adaptive actions. It will include initially more than 7,000 indigenous people, particularly focused on women and youth. We're gonna use 2G bands and local radios as inclusive methods, and transparency because we want to ensure through an open data platform to monitor and impact with different sorts of indicators. Finally, we want to empower and increase the political power of women and youth in climate change adaptation and climate action. Next, please. So how are we going to implement it? Next, please. We are going to deliver a pilot in Peru. Why Peru? Because first of all, Peru already have an indigenous people platform to address climate change. This is composed of 7 organizations that represents different indigenous people. This, however, only brings up 2 representatives from each organization. So are these enough voices? Is mostly male representative. So it's not representative of over the 4 million people, indigenous people living in Peru. And it's not clear what is after the generation of information. So we are going to also have a balanced approach by including female leaders, civil society organizations,
1 minute remaining,
ministries, and the academic sector. After that, we're going to gather evidence and establish channels of communications. There are immense information that already exists, but it is isolated and it's difficult to access. It's on different languages. So we are going to have a desk review. We are going to use radio to increase the information we gather and use different adapted participatory methods, digital and in person. We are going to develop the digital platform. We are going to use a geographic information system. We'll show different multiple layers and the story maps. We are going to use also data studio and artificial intelligence language analysis. This is a two-way communication channel. And after, we are going to develop impact and monitoring indicators. So we need to ensure that policies are working in synergy to protect and restore nature, land, and livelihoods of indigenous people. Next, please. Thank you very much. And I want to finish with a phrase that it says, adaptation policies that do not address the root causes of vulnerability are a threat to indigenous communities' survivals. Let's disrupt the power that brings an unjust world. Thank you very much. Next, please. There is an image there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gabriela. Open that up to our judges. Is there a question for Gabriela and team Just Involvement of Indigenous People in Decision Making?
Yes, I have a question for
Please, Tracy Ann.
Gabriela. Gabriela, thank you for your presentation. What do you think would the attitudes be towards, by the indigenous persons towards this digital platform? Do you think there are going to be any reservations in terms of the data that will be collected and their stories being shared online? Do you envision having somebody be a bridge in between? How do you view reservations?
So first of all, there is we recognize there is a huge technological gap. That's why we don't propose the use of apps that requires smartphones. Instead, we are going to base our network in the 2G network, because it's the one that covers the most territory in Peru. We already have studies in Peru that shows the percentage of coverage of this 2G network. So it's basically the old phones. That's why we are going to use also messages. So we are planning to first have, they already have an indigenous network that for the prior consultation that is going to deliver the capacities required to just reply a message. So we want to do it, we want to increase participation and involvement through first a technology that is already familiar for them, because there's also the discussion of new technology such as smartphones and tablets with indigenous cultures. So that's a huge barrier that we want to, that's why we want to use the 2G network instead of using other. So the digital platform is the bridging of them, by them I mean indigenous communities, or translating their story that could be connected then with policies and effective articulation of efforts towards adaptation. I'm not sure if I was clear.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gabriela and Tracy Ann, for that question. Lots of chat going on in the chat box, so please do keep questions coming in, both from judges and also wider audience members. Thank you very much. Right, our next team is called Climate Team North Africa. This is a team made up of 4 Chevening alumni from Egypt and Tunisia. Our presenter today will be Haitem Kefi, and answering questions in the chat box will be Kareem Abd El-Aziz. So over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Next slide, please. Okay. I would like to start by talking about the importance of the agriculture sector in Tunisia and Egypt. It represents 12% of the GDP, and it's the main activity for rural regions, significantly based on smallholder farmers. Which brings me to the point of how vulnerable the income of these farmers and the country's food securities are to drought and floods, intensified by climate change. Despite all this, smallholders are still not coping with these risks. In this case, crop insurance could be a solution to this problem. However, the existing insurances are traditional insurances and they are expensive, and most importantly, they're not trusted by farmers, which explain why only 3% or less have coverage. Next slide, please. So the solution we are proposing is a blockchain-based crop insurance. As an emerging and disruptive technology, blockchain could be a game changer in this field. Blockchain is famous for one, being a decentralized technology, which means there is no central. Two, its records are immutable. It's impossible to change them. Three, it allows smart contracts, which are automatically executed agreements. So how does all this work? Well, this will be a digital platform available on phones with policies in form of smart contracts indexed to local weather using weather stations and satellites. These policies and payouts are automatically triggered when the amount of rain is below or above a pre-specified level. Moreover, all the financial transactions could be done with mobile payment, which exists in both countries, which means there is no bank account or credit cards needed. We strongly believe actually there is a good opportunity for crop insurances because claim cycles and transaction costs will be significantly reduced. And most importantly, farmers can trust this system since payouts are transparent and fast. Next slide, please. The solution will have a positive impact on the smallholder level as well as on the regional and country level. For smallholders, their income, assets, and livelihood will be improved and they will be more likely to get out of poverty. Moreover, when insured, they can access credit to innovate and buy new farming technology to boost their productivity. For the regional level, the access to credit by itself will support the development of the agricultural sector, which will lead to poverty reduction in the rural areas. In addition, food security will be increased and food aid will be reduced. Next slide, please. So for the implementation part, for a blockchain crop insurance solution to be implemented, there needs to be a strong partnership between 4 key holders, which we identified. First, an insurance service provider, which will design the policies. Second, a weather data provider to collect and manage all the rainfall data. Third, a blockchain provider where the digital platform and user interface will be built. And last but not least, the mobile money provider, which will enable all the financial transactions, in this case, the payments and payouts. We will also need financial institutions such as banks to act as a strong distribution channels by offering insurances as part of their loans.
1 minute remaining.
Partner. So in summary, the blockchain-based crop insurance will be a scalable, accessible, and affordable solution. Scalable because it is easily customized, and thanks to blockchain, it could be launched anywhere. Accessible because it will be available from a mobile phone, and affordable because the reduced cost will translate to lower premiums. And above all, the transparency of the process will build the much needed trust for farmers to buy insurances and hopefully become more resilient to extreme weathers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Haitem. Over to judges. I'm not sure if you've got your camera available, Haitem, if you are able to turn it on, but no worries if not.
It should be on. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Maybe there's something covering the camera. It's okay. We can hear you very clearly, and that's what's important. I will ask the judges if there is a question for Climate Team North Africa.
I've got a question.
Please, Mark.
So my question relates to the indexing that you were doing against local weather conditions. I think one of the big issues in not just North Africa, but in many other parts of Africa relates to the relative sparsity of weather stations. So does the lack of weather knowledge impact on your ability to pay out on insurance?
Hi, Tim. I'm not sure if we've lost you now. Is anybody else from the team on the call who might be able to jump in and answer Mark's question? Kareem, I'm not sure if you're able to put you on the spot.
If no one's around now to come on the mic to answer, they can always post something in the chat. That will be fine.
Took the words out of my mouth. Great. Thanks very much for that. A really interesting question. Some specific knowledge there. Yeah, I think Haitem has fallen off the call, so we'll give him a chance to answer when he gets back online. Thanks very much to that team for your presentation. We'll move on to our next team, which is the Indian Ocean SDG 14 Action Group. This is a team of 4 Chevening alumni from Mauritius. Our presenter, actually, I've got 2 names down for both presenter and answering questions. So we have Marie Stephania Perrine and Joseph Jean Noel Jolicoeur. One, I assume, will be presenting and one will be answering questions. Over to you.
Good evening, everybody. So next slide, please. So sea level rise is a pressing threat to coastal communities in small island developing states, SIDS. According to IPCC projections, coastal regions in SIDS are likely to be exposed to high tide flooding, extreme weather events, habitat loss, shoreline erosion, increased salinity, and loss of beach area. Rodrigues, an outer island of the Republic of Mauritius, known for implementing bold and innovative initiatives such as the banning of non-biodegradable single-use plastic products to protect terrestrial and marine environment, is already being impacted by those changes. So, however, there is a gap in policies related to adaptation to sea level rise. There is therefore an urgency to come forward with adequate adaptation measures. To address the aforementioned challenges, our team is coming forward with a 20 years lifespan policy proposal entitled Integrating Sea Level Rise Adaptation into Coastal Planning Policies. Next slide. Our solutions will provide the need to create public and political awareness on the impact of sea level rise, because although Rodriguans perceive changes in climatic events, sea patterns, and physical aspects of coastal regions, they still engage in their daily routines and practices. Secondly, to the need to empower and train citizens to develop their adaptive capacity. Thirdly, the lack of collaboration between the government, local and international NGOs in view of supporting adaptation measures and encourage projects instigated at community level. Fourthly, the crucial need to preserve inherent sustainable habits of Rodriguans. And lastly, the need to implement planned socioeconomic development projects, mainly along coastal regions. Next slide, please. The intended impacts are increased awareness on sea level rise among Rodriguans. Secondly, enhanced knowledge so that Rodriguans can take ownership of adaptation initiatives at grassroots level. Thirdly, to preserve and ensure transmission of traditional ecological knowledge for adaptation to the younger generation. Fourthly, to bridge the data, knowledge, and skills gaps on sea level rise. To foster the creation of green and blue jobs. to encourage the adoption of pragmatic green alternatives like floating gardens and floating houses, amongst others. And lastly, to empower environmental NGOs to facilitate reskilling, upskilling, and shift towards alternative livelihoods. Next slide, please. To implement our policy, we shall firstly assess the damage caused by sea level rise in coastal communities by conducting impact assessments. Secondly, collaborate with the Rodrigues Council of Social Services, RCSS, which is an umbrella NGO regrouping the hundreds of village communities in Rodrigues. RCSS also acts as a bridge between the civil society and local government. As a strong partner, RCSS will help us conduct a needs assessment of what Rodriguans know and what they still need to learn regarding sea level rise. The needs assessment will help us prepare appropriate training programs with appropriate resource persons in view of building our citizens' resilience and knowledge. Thirdly, we shall collaborate with local artists to produce original, informative, and impactful media to disseminate information. Fourthly, we shall develop a curriculum around traditional ecological knowledge, for example, technical and vocational education training, Tebbeth. So these learners will be trained on stone terracing, which is a traditional skill used to combat soil and sand erosion, and by extension, protecting from siltation. Lastly, we shall set up Action for Ocean School in primary, secondary, and Tebbeth schools to instill a culture of protection, conservation, policy understanding in the younger generation. They will view protective and conservative actions as normal behavior and practices. Pro-environmental behavior will contribute to lifelong environmentally friendly practices. Emphasis will thus be put on sea protection through the learning of good protection practices and unlearning of bad ones. So the policy proposal thus intends to ensure a smooth transition into green and blue economy that is informed, equitable, economically, and socially sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really fascinating presentation there. Judges, over to you. Is there a question for our team? Any questions? It must be a sign that you covered everything in your slides and presentation. Congratulations to your team for that. If there are any questions from the audience, do pop those into the chat, and I'm sure the team will be there to answer those. Thank you so much, team. Big congratulations.
Thank you.
Great. Moving on to our next team. This is the Paraguayan team. It's made up of 5 Chevening alumni. The presenter will be Jacqueline Cabañas, and answering questions will be Rebecca Ortega. So without further ado, we'll hand over to them.
Thank you so much. So Paraguay is in a privileged situation with an almost 100% renewable electricity generation coming from hydropower. However, more than 65% of the total generation is exported to neighboring countries at a low price. The reason for this massive exportation is mainly due to the lack of infrastructure to grab and use all the green energy generated. Next slide, please. Ironically, biomass and fuel source account for around 80% of the final energy consumption, where part of the industries are heavily dependent on biomass, and the transport sector is the major responsible for almost 90% of all imported petroleum, and the energy sector total CO2 emissions. On top of that, Paraguay could face a deficit of energy by 2030 due to the increasing demand. And the historical drought that is hitting the country emphasizes the need for the diversification of renewable and clean energy sources. Next slide, please. Considering this challenging and unique situation for our country, we have developed strategies to implement 3 COP26 goals. In the short term, our main sector target is public transportation. As medium-term and long-term plan, we are focusing on generating incentives for the use of solar energy to power industries. and introducing Paraguay in a promising green hydrogen supply chain. Next slide, please. The impact of our policy regarding electromobility is massive because we are not only drastically changing the final energy consumption matrix with the transition from fossil fuels to electricity, but also targeting the public transport sector that has an enormous impact on society. With the electrification of public transportation, we are greatly reducing the energy sector CO2 emissions and an important amount of imported fossil fuels, creating social impact by improving the society's quality of life and achieving social inclusion by reduction of the transportation tariff. In addition, this opens up an important opportunity to Paraguay by applying existing successful laws for national and international investment in the country to create an electromobility industry in Paraguay, inserting the country in a global electromobility supply chain, creating significant amount of job opportunities. Regarding the diversification of renewables, our policy targeting firstly in the transition to solar energy generation, strategically focusing to reduce biomass dependency on industry, allowing the restoration of renewable biomass. This strategy will give time to the government to structure and invest in new energy generation to avoid the potential deficit of energy expected by 2030. The incremental use of solar power in industry will allow the rise and investment in the solar power market in Paraguay, creating green job opportunities. And finally, by incentivizing electrolyzer manufacturers, we aim to insert Paraguay in a promising green hydrogen supply chain, which is currently one of the main focus of many countries worldwide. Next slide, please. Currently, the government subsidies the conventional transport sector. That is why it is possible to replace this by financing the transition to electromobility. We propose a flexible credit with 5-year grace period for the investment in the public buses fleet and charging station, also including a differential energy tariff for charging purposes until 2030. The scalability is
1 minute remaining.
With the reduction of the transition cost to electric buses, giving the owner the chance to minimize the implementation cost, optimizing the operation and improving the public transport service. Regarding solar energy, we are also proposing to offer flexible credits to the industries to invest in solar generation, making the use of solar power more attractive, affordable, and sustainable for them, as well as providing tax reduction benefits to low carbon industry. The opportunity of selling energy surplus to the electrical grid in a future distributed generation scheme demonstrates the scalability of this policy. And regarding green hydrogen, to insert Paraguay in a promising supply chain, our policy aims to engage electrolyzer manufacturers by giving them import tax exception and 1% tax for international export within and outside the Mercosur. Thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Another example of excellent timekeeping. You've all really shown that it is possible to get lots of information into the 5-minute slot. I will open up. Oh, Tracy Ann's popped a question in the chat box. Tracy Ann, I don't know if you wanted to pose that live to Jacqueline.
Yes, I just wanted to find out with the use of electromobility, what will the new energy mix, what do you foresee the new energy mix be in Paraguay in the next 5 years?
So by introducing electrification in the transport sector, we are changing the final energy matrix by replacing the biomass and fossil fuel source for electricity. Is this
so give me a breakdown in terms of how much percentage is that we're talking?
Like around 80% of the dependence of fuels and biomass source right now.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Ambitious, but that's what we need, right? Ambitious policies. Thank you very much. Thanks very much to the question as well. Do keep the comments coming in the chat box. It's really lively today. That's great to see. Thanks for all of your engagement. We will move on to our next team. This is Team People to People. It's a team made up of 3 Chevening and CSC alumni from the Dominican Republic and Russia. Again, I'm not sure who's taking which role, but we have Mildred Samboy and Serafima Osipenko. So over to you.
Yeah, it's Mildred Samboy here. Hi. Okay, so thank you very much for this opportunity. We are people to people. And please, next slide. We would like to immediately go to the main challenges that we are facing as a country in the Dominican Republic. We are a small island development state, mostly affected by climate shocks, and these climate shocks impacting livelihoods. We are the 10th country in the world with the most vulnerable impact due to climate change. And also we are struggling with the Human Development Index and considerations related to economic growth, access to health, access to education, and other issues related to better life quality. This is also reflected in gender inequalities in the country, in which, unfortunately, all these indexes, when we immediately develop a consideration of women's situation in the country and access to these three main autonomies, such as political, bodily autonomy, and economic empowerment, we are still facing struggles. In this sense, we wanted to go specifically to Josefa. Josefa lives in the Enrique region in the Dominican Republic, and we wanted to do this proposal with the people that are most affected, because we cannot do actions without the people that are involved in it. So in this sense, we created this project together with Josefa, in which they clearly established the main challenges related to women producers, coffee producers in the region. They have insufficient funding, they are facing droughts, coffee rust due to climate change process, deficiencies in soil restoration, limited access to fertilizers, deficiency of tools to work the crops, and undervalued coffee prices and revenues. Next slide, please. So in this sense, we presented a solution that is called People to People, which is a policy program proposal which aims to develop a financing process to create a hub for climate change adaptation in the region. Related to crowdsourcing and crowdfunding mechanisms to enhance resources mobilization and respond to climate change challenges for small and medium coffee entrepreneurs. The policy proposal is more developed in the region because it connects small and medium coffee entrepreneurs with funding and expertise to adapt the farms to the climate shocks that are happening right now. And it will reach through a blended fund to replenish insufficient resources due to climate adaptation package, complemented by a platform to exchange knowledge, which is the hub ecosystem that we have in the ending process. This package consists of two main components: technological upgrade of farms, such as advanced equipment, machinery, fertilizers, irrigation systems, soil testing, basic training for climate change adaptation, and moreover, will access to these hub ecosystem where people can share experiences, feedback on implemented measures. These also will deepen knowledge, connecting with specialists worldwide and partner with new suppliers. Can we go to the next slide, please? The impact obviously is community building. This is one of the main associations in the region, the Women Coffee Producers, also the land ownership and sustainable management, which unfortunately is one of the main issues in the entire country. People do not necessarily own the land or have the empowerment to produce this as established by Josefa in the entire process. And the third part is the adaptation and resiliency. Unfortunately, one of the main impacts in the country is the Arroyo, the crop that is impacting the crop. And also we are in the middle of the path of the hurricanes in the Caribbean. So each time this impact the Dominican Republic, all the crops are lost. And unfortunately, that's the reason why the financing is
1 minute remaining
to crowdsource and to work together with this. Next slide, please. The implementation, as we mentioned, is the blended finance fund. It might be scalable because we are also considering here the cheapening community as one of the main actors and stakeholders. the Dominican chieftain community, but also to make it scalable with this example to the nationwide, but also to other countries in the Latin America region, that we can establish this type of blended financing. The sustainability is also important in the process because we're willing to work together with the municipality and local authorities, with the coffee associations, with international cooperation already working in the space, and the Dominican diaspora, which today signifies an important impact in the economy of the Dominican Republic by all the remittances that are being established worldwide and in the country specifically. So the Dominican diaspora, the Dominican chieftain community, but also Latin America and worldwide. So with this mentioned already, we're more than willing to continue the conversation, and we are quite grateful for the opportunity. We can go to the last slide. We're quite grateful for the opportunity, and we really hope to support Josefa and all the associations of women coffee producers in the Dominican Republic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mildred. I think I might have said in the beginning there that this was a team made of Chevening and CSC alumni, but it's actually just Chevening alumni on your team, so just a correction there. Great, Enrique has his hand up already. Over to you, Enrique, for a question.
Yes, I wanted to ask you what would be the, how would you sustain the financing of the project over time, so that it's not just like once crowdfunding and then like is over, but like how would you sustain it over time?
Yes, definitely. This is a good question. Thank you very much. We want to work together with the municipality, and the hub creation process is the main source of integration. As blended finance, that's why we want to have public sector and private sector sources together with the Dominican diaspora, which has meant with the remittance. Nowadays, many Dominicans outside of the country, they would like to implement or to invest money in many of these actions, but unfortunately, they don't have the window for that. So having the municipality as a local authority, then we might completely develop that hub ecosystem inside the let's say, the official institution that is integrated into local policies. This is the main part that we have the main resources as a public resources, because each municipality needs to have a minimum of resources already established. So we, the private sector, and together with the chieftain community and all the other diasporas, we might be able to maintain the financing over the time, because the baseline is the public funding, but we complement it with the other sources. I don't know if you want to say something.
Yeah, I have a very small addition, like for the future plan, like ideal situation, we would be able to implement blockchain and also cooperate with local banks, like to attract investments even like from individuals. So basically like implementing like DeFi or security tokens for this case, but we didn't cover it in this solution because like it would be too much. But yeah, for the future, yes, to diversify the access to funding and support, so it wouldn't be just like large amounts of money that people can support the community, but also like through the small investments as well. So yeah, I hope we answered the question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, team People to People, and also to our judges again for their questions. Great. Our next team is the South Asian Adaptation League. This is a team made up of 4 CSC alumni representing Sri Lanka and Malaysia. Our presenter today will be Arroyo Caldera, and answering questions will be Krishnal Tiram Arapan. So over to you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. In South and Southeast Asia, 11% of the population lives along their coastlines, and thus they're highly vulnerable to sea level rise. Millions of people living in low-lying areas are likely to be displaced in the future, leading to a climate refugee crisis in the future. Other than that, even at this moment, people's livelihoods as well as their food security is impacted, particularly due to saltwater intrusion. It's also sad to see that it is not only the living who are impacted, because as you can see in the photograph, we can see an inundated cemetery in Southeast Asia. Next slide, please. So when we were looking for answers for this coastal problem, we decided to find the solution from the coast itself. We were particularly interested in nature-based solutions because we felt it was an economically viable solution for countries in this region, particularly as many are developing nations. In terms of the ecosystems in the coastal region, we have many different ones, and we have the salt marshes, the coral reefs, and also the seagrass beds. However, we decided to go with mangrove restoration simply because of a lower unit restoration cost. So with that, let's come to our actual solution, which is mainstreaming mangrove restoration at the community, national, and regional level as a means of adapting to sea level rise. We believe in a community-linked adaptation by exploring the strong relationship between nature and people. What we see through our solution is community engagement, and we want to empower them with the skills and the resources to conserve, restore, and sustainably utilize coastal mangroves. We are also mindful of the indigenous communities in this region, and we believe that the traditional knowledge that they have could also be shared right across the region, but of course, giving the due recognition to the holders of that indigenous knowledge. In order to do this, we see a knowledge exchange platform being made to really implement our solution. And this can also be used in order to share any new research that is being done in this area. Next slide, please. So when we looked at the impacts of our policy proposal, we tied it in with the 2030 agenda. So the most important impact would be strengthening climate resilience in this region and moving towards SDG 13 on climate action. Mangroves have a strong potential to both as a solution for both adaptation as well as mitigation, because it is a blue carbon ecosystem. But other than improving the climate resilience in the region, mangrove restoration can also have many other core benefits. And some of these include improving conservation efforts of fauna and flora, both in the water as well as on land, SDGs 14 and 15, diversifying local livelihoods, moving into SDG 1, and also SDG 8 on economic growth. Increasing food security, SDG 2, is another important aspect. Thank you. And also enhancing regional cooperation. Next slide, please. In the implementation, in the core, we have the empowerment of the local communities, but in the outer rings, we have the whole region coming together. And for this, we hope to use existing regional cooperation, such as ASEAN and SAARC. The nexus between the two would be the national governments, and we really hope to have measurable NBS targets within national plans in order to have an accountable framework that would really bring mainstream mangrove restoration into the forefront. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Judges, is there a question for our team?
I have a question.
Please.
So mangrove restoration and restoration of mangrove habitats has been talked about for some considerable time. Could you elaborate or explain why you think it hasn't been taken up at perhaps a scale that you think it warrants based on your presentation when you make the case for its advantages?
Yes, thank you, Mark. I think while it has been around, it is what we feel is it's being done maybe in a piecemeal fashion in, even in one country, in different regions, or, even in the national level, we don't see much structure in the way this is implemented. So that is why we find this having these different levels, the community level, then national level, and then a regional level cooperation. We feel that mangroves have this huge potential, but for some reason it hasn't come to the forefront. So we hope a policy like this, which kind of brings together these key players and right across the region, might find an answer to that question you asked. Actually, yes.
Super. Thanks very much.
Thanks for that. Lots of food for thought. Do carry on the conversation in the chat box. Thank you very much. We will move on to our next team. This is Agro-Climate Shield Africa, or AXA. It's a team made up of 4 Chevening and CSC alumni from Sub-Saharan Africa, representing Nigeria, Lesotho and Zambia. Our presenter today will be Ayubami Oladipo, and answering questions will be Chikopa Isa Sokotela. So over to you.
Okay, thank you for having us. Good evening, everyone, or good day, everyone. I am Ayubami Oladipo with AXA. Next slide, please. As the world rapidly draws near 2030, policymakers and non-state actors are scrambling to ensure that the SDG targets are met at low.
Ayubami, we've actually lost you. I'm not sure if you can still hear us. It might be worth turning off your camera if you can, and seeing if that helps with the bandwidth. No, I think she has frozen. Is anybody else from the team perhaps in touch with Ayubami just to check if she can get online? Okay, what I might propose is we will move on to the next team, and somebody from the secretary from our side will be able to get in touch with Team Agro-Climate Shield Africa, and hopefully we can get you set up again before the end of the event. Either Ayubami can get reconnected, or we can see if there's a willing team member to step in and take over.
I'm back.
Oh, you're back.
Yes.
I was saying, Ayubami, maybe it's worth trying without the camera just to minimize the pressure on the bandwidth.
Okay.
We can hear you clearly. I'll let you know.
Maybe I should just... Okay, all right, thank you. So I'll start over again.
Please.
So I was saying that at the art of achieving goals 1 and 2, no poverty and eradicating hunger in Sub-Saharan Africa lies SDG 13, which is climate action. Now, in Sub-Saharan Africa, droughts have led to hunger and death, and we all remember the cases of Sudan, Kenya, Ethiopia, and currently we have the farmer-elder clashes in Nigeria. The losses have been economical. For instance, Nigeria has lost about $5 billion annually to desertification and drought. And on these graphs on my right-hand side, we can see that severe droughts have affected different agricultural value chains during the cropping season, affecting up to 50% of farmlands in northern Nigeria. Despite tools such as the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program and the National Agricultural Resilience Framework here in Nigeria, which addresses the adaptation of small-scale farmers to climate change, sustainability of adaptation is often hampered by inadequate finance and little to zero commercialization of climate change adaptation. Climate change related projects are usually financed by donor agencies and locally administered by government departments, whose priority are mostly non-commercial. Furthermore, the level of disbursement from climate funds to adaptation in Africa have been really low. Next slide, please. To address this, we're proposing the Climate Adaptation Investment Holding Vehicle, which is CAIV, to catalyze sustainable investments in climate adaptation ventures. CAIV will be responsible for raising capital from various sources such as the development partners, ministries of finance, and international climate funds, for instance, the Green Climate Fund. CAIV will also identify and plan for investment opportunities, which will be delivered through the Adaptation Project Special Purpose Vehicles. These SPVs will be responsible for delivering solutions such as drought-resistant varieties, irrigation solutions, and early warning or climate information to the farmers who will pay a token for such services. Access to local and foreign capital could improve as an investment holding company offers opportunities for good corporate governance, continuity, professionalism, transparency, and accountability as opposed to ad hoc task forces. Next slide, please. Apart from ensuring sustainability of adaptation innovations, the projected impact of this project include food security and enhanced resilience for 10 million plus vulnerable farmers in Nigeria for about 9 years. It allows subnational governments to access the funds needed for adaptation. It enables job creation and value chain development at both the CAIV and the SPV levels. Also enables revenue and forex for the farmers through business promotion, then climate smart industrialization for value addition. Next slide. The next steps for CAIV is for us to prepare a concept paper which will be presented to the legislature. After its incorporation, we'll appoint board members and the company will begin operations and raise capitals which will be used in various SPVs. The project can be adopted by all countries and is accessible to all relevant stakeholders, as well as allows climate solutions to be affordable to small-scale farmers who are the most vulnerable to drought and other extreme weather events. Such as CAIV seeks to de-risk adaptation investment for small companies. Next slide. Yeah, so there are many beautiful adaptation projects out there, but they often fail due to poor funding and disjointed structure. It is time we became intentional about climate change. Thank you. Sorry for that.
Thank you very much. You really made back time there, Ayobami, so thanks for that. Judges, is there a question for our team?
Hello?
Hi, is that Enrique? Go ahead.
Yes. How would you compare like your scheme to other subsidies or schemes that are present at the moment, like the one for fertilizers and purchasing seeds? How would you like compare it, or what would be like the main benefits you see from it?
Okay, so the main difference between us is that it's an umbrella for all these different interventions. So you have the seeds, you have the fertilizers, you have the climate information, and many times, many of these interventions that are out there are usually disjointed. There's no synergy, and so there's a mismatch of needs of the farmers and what is dashed out to the farmers on the field. But through this special, through CAIV, there's an umbrella body that ensures that all of this is accounted for. There's organizational structure such that there is no mismatch of intervention and the needs of the farmers.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for that question, and many more that are coming in the chat box. It's a great presentation. Okay, moving on to our next group. This is Agro-Forestry and Tree Planting. It's a group of 2 team members from West Africa representing Cameroon and Ghana. Both are CSC alumni. Our presenters today will be Emmanuel Suka, and answering questions will be Isaac Makponga. Over to you.
Yeah, I'm Emmanuel Suka from Southern Cameroon, and my co-presenter is Isaac Mapoka from Ghana. Our topic for today is rising deforestation and bushfires in forest-dependent communities in sub-Saharan Africa under severe climate conditions. We will be using agroforestry and tree planting to resolve this issue. Next slide. So the actual challenge is that deforestation and bushfires is the greatest problem in sub-Saharan Africa, with northern sub-Saharan Africa contributing over 25% to the global carbon emissions, and over 65% of sub-Saharan population is rural and made up of smallholder farmers, with contributing about 23% of the GDP, which is coming from agriculture. And this means that there's continuous agricultural expansion and increasing deforestation and bush fires. There's also lack of climate smart agricultural methods, inadequate land use planning and governance, lack of tree planting culture, lack of training, increased deforestation and bush fires. And this is causing great impact on the global food security, ecosystems, rural livelihoods, and climate variability. For example, Cameroon has been rated as the largest timber producer in sub-Saharan Africa, with high abusive land use, and have lost about 92% of its coastal forests. And Red Pack Cameroon project has projected that by 2030, deforestation will double, and that will increase emissions to about 1.8 gigatons of CO2 emissions, and loss of over 675 species and more than 10% habitats and 55 threatened species. And then in Ghana, Ghana has been earmarked as losing its rainforest faster than any other country in the world, with over 60% forest land to cocoa plantations. Ghana has lost in the past 10 years over 136,000 hectares of natural forest, equivalent to about 82.2 megatons of CO2 emissions. Next slide, please. Yeah, our solution, we propose against this backdrop of rising deforestation and bushfires and loss of livelihoods and community vulnerability, forest degradation and poverty, food scarcity, climate variability, etc., trees have received very little attention in current climate change debates. And also previous and policies and guidelines for sustainable forest management fail due to lack of an integrated approach and a holistic implementation system. So we propose a policy that is crafted into an integrated landscape approach that is composed of agroforestry and tree planting. It is crafted and will be implemented through a democratic process of consensual integrated land use, agroforestry, and tree planting system. It is an interactive and supports local governance and involves all stakeholders in the identification of problems and then adaptability for sustainability, sustainable management, development. Also, the project is designed according to local context using affordable materials, local expertise, with 10 recommended
1 minute
policies,
remaining.
Strategies. It has a budget of over $22,000 and is envisaged to impact over 300 million people. Next slide, please. The project will impact a lot of people, about 5,000 local farmers, and then it will also hold deforestation, and then it will reduce poverty, and then it will increase food production, and then it will also improve ecosystem goods and services. Next slide, please. It is going to be implemented by, first of all, setting out the various stakeholders that are going to participate according to their participation, interest, influence, and project and interest in the project. And they are going to, the project is going to be implemented in local council, in community forests, in local councils, and in council forests. And we are going to work together like a team and with donor partners such as the UNFCCC, Commonwealth, local governments and concerned communities, DFID, ODA, UNEP, and FAO. And we're going to come together and identify these projects, work together in meetings and in workshops and do trainings. And then we'll select project focal persons and then design, implement established trees and tree crops nurseries, prepare planting sites and farms, and plant trees, and then manage the tree farms and monitor and evaluate the project. And we also going to share benefits, and we'll develop a data bank that will monitor and follow up this project to see that it is sustainable, and how it will be reported upon, and then reports will be built up and will be replicated in other areas. Our project is affordable because it is.
Sorry, Emmanuel, we're at time. If you could just summarize in one closing sentence. Sorry to cut you off.
Okay, yeah. So we will scale it in other areas. It's easy to get through. And the last slide, please. Okay, thank you, and welcome your questions.
Thanks very much. Sorry to cut you off. And there's a lot of information there, and I think you managed to share your points with us very clearly. To the judges, is there a question for this team?
I had I had one question for Emmanuel. It was actually related to some of the content in the slide deck you presented. I think on one slide you talked about impacting, was it 300 million people?
Yeah.
And then in the next slide you talked about a much smaller number of farms that were going to be impacted. So could you just explain why those two numbers are different, and how you are going to achieve that impact at scale when you're only working with quite a small number of farms, from what I understood?
Yeah, this 5,000 are the number of farms and farmers. So we are working on a scale of scaling on a scale of 3 to get this number up to 300 million. And Ghana, that is the pilot place for this project, has over 300 million people there. And if we shift it to Cameroon, then you see that the 300 million is even small. So we are talking about the short-term impact that will give about 5,000 farmers employment and other groups. And then when we scale this project and adapt it in other areas like in Cameroon, I think the number is going to quadruple.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much to Team AXA. Team Agro-Forestry and Food Planting. Okay, 2 teams to go. Our penultimate team is called Resilient Planet. It's a mixed team made up of Chevening and CSC alumni from India and China. Today, our presenter is Nabagan Ojia, and answering questions we have Yu Chuan Wen. So over to you.
Thank you so much. Next slide, please. We all know that we are living in a time when lives and livelihoods are being threatened by frequent weather extremes. And the consequences are going to be very, very high in days to come. Already the IPCC report warned it, really a code red for humanity. Adaptation strategies, which are actually important for countries, are not up to mark, especially in the developing countries, to improve the adaptation and also to reduce the vulnerability. So statistically, 1 billion people living in 31 developing countries have low resilience, meaning that they have limited financial, physical, and social support to cope with the climate risk. Again, we have the socioeconomic challenges posed by COVID-19 pandemic, which created havoc across the globe. It pushed the global poverty to a new low and also added another layer of danger to climate risk. So big hurdles for the world leaders now. At one hand, we have to manage the new crisis, and on the other hand, we have to achieve the 2030 agenda. So next slide, please. We have a practical solution to address all these challenges. We know that social protection schemes are have gained much momentum in recent days, and also adaptation goals, adaptation strategies are very, very important in countries. So our policy says that combine both social protection scheme and adaptation strategies and implement it under countries' adaptation goals. It will create resilience at a scale. And this solution is built on Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which is known as the largest social protection scheme in the world. And it covers 150 million rural people in East India and also creates varieties of natural resource management related work relating to land, water, and forest. So our policy will build the capacity of the recipients of MGNREGS to protect them from different shocks of climate change and prepare them to absorb and cope with the shocks and stresses in days to come. So at the same time, the infrastructures which are created under this scheme will promote nature-based solutions and plethora of livelihood opportunities for the rural communities in India, so that they can be engaged in the scheme round the year for different type of livelihood activities. So next slide, please. And let me tell you that this, the strength of this policy is MGNREGS is an act in India. It can be amended, but cannot be checked. There is a robust institutional system starting from village level to the country level. There is a robust system which is responsible to implement this scheme. And annually, $10 billion is allocated for implementation of this scheme in India. So we have a very strong base to execute this policy in India. And the impact, let me tell you, by slight modification of the design of the infrastructures which are created under this scheme, and by introducing new way of planning, about 4 million rural infrastructures will be created. And 150 million people across rural India will move beyond their vulnerable thresholds by the year 2025, because they will be engaged in this nature-based solution in these years. And at the same time, these infrastructures will increase the carbon, it will sequester the carbon. It will also increase the irrigation potential to absorb the people around in rural India. At the same time, when the policy will be implemented across the globe, 47% of the world's population will move beyond their vulnerable thresholds, because these 47% world's population are covered now under social protection scheme as per ILO recent report. Next slide, please. So we have the stakeholders, the ministries of different social justice, rural development, forest, environment, provincial government, international bodies like FCDO, World Bank, UN agencies, national and international NGOs. So we will bring all these stakeholders together, present the proposal to them, get the approval from the government, train the implementing agencies, initiate the action, and scale it up across. At the same time, we will push the proposal across the globe or in the regional level through these international agencies like World Bank and UN agencies. It is very accessible, affordable, and scalable, because across the world, social protection schemes are there. $2 trillion is allocated every year. The system is in place, so it is very well scalable. So the solution is with us, and the world is ready to take up. Thank you so much. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Navagan. Spot on 5 minutes there, so great timekeeping, and thanks for sharing that with us. To our judges, is there a question for Team Resilient Planet?
Yes,
Hi.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I want to find out from Team Resilient. I like the fact that you have the social protection programs and you speak about the MGNREGS. Can you explain how exactly would that work?
Yeah, good question. MGNREGS in India works because it has infrastructure component, and millions of infrastructure created every year where the rural people are engaged, and they are getting employment, 100 days of employment every year, and they are getting payment for that also. So at the same time, the employment is created and also the infrastructures are created. So that means beyond 100 days also, these people will be engaged round the year. The livelihood which will, the infrastructure which will create the different type of livelihood will engage the rural communities around the year. So I'm not expecting that this type of schemes are there in every country, but the whole idea is to integrate climate risk management in the social protection system so that the people in every country or in the developing countries at least, they will be in a position to fight with the climate shocks and stresses in long run. So I hope I answered your question to some extent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Resilient Planet. Okay, we'll move on to our final team of today's sessions. So our last team is called Mountain Mates. It's a group of Chevening, CSC and Marshall alumni. Their topic focus is food security, and they're from the USA, India, South Africa and Pakistan. Our presenter today will be Sibulele Ngomane, and answering questions will be Gitanjali Singh. So over to you.
Good afternoon, judges and teams. I'm Sibulele, and I'm very proud to present our Mountain Mates policy. We will be focusing on the Hindu Kush Himalayas mountainous region, also known as the HKH region. Next slide, please. Our challenge focuses on securing the food and the livelihoods of the HK region. This region is characterized by a strong reliance on agriculture, both for income and for food availability. Due to the increase of due to the change in climate change, such as increase in weather patterns, there will be extreme weather patterns such as floods and droughts, which will lead to an impact to agricultural production in this region. Therefore, in order to make this region resilient to climate change, it is very important to also make it resilient to agriculture, which brings us to our solution. Next slide, please. Our solution will focus on reintroducing neglected and underutilized species in this region. These species include crops and livestock that have been bred for several generations to withstand extreme weather patterns. Examples include specific land races of buckwheat, amritha, specific types of legumes. We tend to implement this production policy by looking at specific neglected, underutilized species per region by creating a panel of these species that will then be implemented. We will focus on implementing our policy on a 3-pillar strategy. This will include first pillar, financial instruments that will make the production of these species affordable for farmers. This will include instruments such as low interest loans for farmers that would like to transition into this agricultural production. We'll have purchase assistance for equipment that focuses on making these crops and livestock more adaptable to extreme weather patterns. To move on to the next pillar, we will have training and capacity building, which will first of all ensure that the farmers are able to use the climate smart equipment, but are also able to share knowledge on indigenous practices when dealing with these crops and livestock. I think a very important part is to also create community awareness on the benefits of these species, such as highly nutritious food, a diverse diet, and also tremendous commercial potential. This brings me to the last pillar of our strategy. This will improve the awareness of these neglected, underutilized species by looking at implementing a geographic indicator for these tools. A geographic indicator is a trade instrument that's commonly used to tag foods that come from specific regions that have particular characteristics. Our species not only are indigenous, but are also climate resilient. Once these foods are GI tagged, we'll create a market logo that will be implemented for food that will be sold in local markets and also international supermarkets. A prototype for this GI tagged food is to our right, where we have a traditionally Himalayan stamp for the supermarkets. Next slide, please. So the most important aspect of our presentation in terms of the impact is that it cuts across multiple economic and climate change development pathways. What we saw when we're doing the hackathon, we realized that our policy actually has a triple bottom line impact, meaning that it will affect the people, the profits, and also the planet. In particular, for farmers, we foresee a stable income due to consistent crop yields. For consumers, we also see that there will be improved health outcomes due to the fact that most of the consumers are also farmers. So there'll be a reduction in poverty, but because consumers will be eating a diverse and nutritious diet, they will also be healthier. That's also a productive labor force. For the region, the most important is that it will be climate resilient, but also enhance biodiversity. We also notice that our policy meets several sustainable—
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. Several sustainable development goals. And to our right, you can see some of the development goals that our policy will help to meet. Next slide, please. In our policy implementation, I think the very important aspect is that it is accessible, affordable, and scalable for the farmers and consumers, but also for the public policy makers in question. So to ensure that our policy is accessible, we will include stakeholders that are experts in this region, such as ICIMOD and the Food Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. These two organizations not only deal with our region in question, they also work very closely with food security at the intersection of climate change. To make sure that our policies are affordable, we work very closely with international governments, such as the German government, as an example, or also the British government to help fund this project. In terms of scalability, we will look into rolling out our policy in a 6-phase project lifecycle. One of the most important phases that I would like to highlight is that we'll establish a pilot country. Once this pilot country has been established, we will implement the 3-pillar strategy in this country and then monitor and evaluate the results. Once these results are in, we will iterate and customize it to the remaining countries and then roll it out. Another important aspect of our rollout is that we will consistently seek feedback from the farmers, community leaders such as pastors, and also consumers to garner their feedback. Thus we can improve it for the other countries that we roll it out. Next slide, please. So that's our presentation. I'd like to thank you so much for organizing it. I would like to also introduce my colleagues or team members. We all have various skill sets. So some colleagues are agricultural biologists, some are economists, and some are climate change policymakers. I'll open the floor to questions.
Thank you very much, Sibulele. Are there any questions from any of our judges?
Yes.
Great, Enrique, over to you.
Yes, I wanted to ask you, what would be your main strategy to promote the implementation of this policy, and if you have any evidence of like this happening in some region of like people starting to use again like traditional crops?
Yes, I think so first to explain why we chose neglected, underutilized species. They're neglected mainly because of the lack of the advocacy of these species. So there's evidence that these species can withstand climate change, that the local populations can, nutritionally speaking, absorb these foods into their diet. So one of our main strategies, which we incorporated in the 3-pillar strategy, is the GI tags. So the GI tags will actually, first of all, create awareness from a legal and a policy point of view. So when doing research, we realize that a lot of these neglected species are not GI tagged. And I think once they are GI tagged, it will be able to have a strong market-facing campaign for the use in terms of the farming and also the consumption. So once, I think here you can also see, we can foresee strong supply demand market forces. So once consumers are really intrigued in consuming these foods, farmers will also be more motivated to farm them. An example of a campaign that was nationwide is actually a couple of years ago, my country, South Africa, created a Proudly South African campaign, which promoted the consumption and the purchase of domestically produced products. And they also implemented a similar logo, which made it very easy for consumers when shopping for various options to actually pick out those food groups.
Fantastic, thank you so much. There are a couple of questions in the chat, so I'll ask you and your team to try to get to those quickly because we will be closing the session very shortly. Thank you so much to you and to all of our teams today. I think that's just been an incredible 2 hours of information. Thanks, of course, to all of our presenters, but also to all of the team members behind the scenes. Thank you, of course, to our fantastic judges who've given up so much time, and the job doesn't finish just yet. Our judges will now be going on to a follow-up call where they will discuss the different policies in detail and very challengingly come up with the policy that they would like to select to be the winner for this theme. Thank you to our all of our engaged listeners today. The chat box has been so active. It's been great to see, and that's been really great and animated. You'll see on the slide that we have the upcoming events. So the finals for the mitigation theme are tomorrow from 1 to 3 UK time. And then next week, the 27th of October, we'll have our grand final. So there will be 4 winners in total from the 4 themes who'll be presenting at the grand final. The recording for today will be made available, and we'll send out information of how you can access the recording. And once our judges have decided the winners from all of the sessions this week, we'll also be communicating the winners with you. For now, all I can say is a massive thank you again to everybody who's joined us today, and to everyone's hard work. And I hope to see you at the remaining sessions. Thank you.